If you look at the world map today around West Asia, where all the Stan countries are, here's a name you're not going to find: a country called Khalistan. But a group called Sikhs For Justice is trying to change that. In this podcast, I will be examining the resurgent Khalistan movement. It's a movement that's trying to create an independent nation carved out of India's northwest for people of the Sikh faith. If you were in India in the 80s, that word Khalistan brings up decades-old memories, none of them good, of bombings, hijackings, and assassinations. But for young Sikhs living in the West, Khalistan has come to mean equality and justice. My name is Anila, and you are listening to Sikh Nation, an audio documentary. Join me as we explore all sides of the Khalistan movement, a story that will ricochet from the present to 40 years ago and back to now. On a Sunday morning in January, I was in San Francisco's Civic Center. I was covering a referendum that was being held there for people of the Sikh faith of Indian origin. This was a referendum for Sikhs who want their own independent homeland. They call it Khalistan, which means land of the pure. And they want this independent state to be carved out of India's northwest state of Punjab. While I was there, I heard a crowd of people chanting, "Death to India." As I begin this series, I want to take this opportunity of hearing that chant to lay my cards on the table. I'm an American citizen who grew up in India. I have a lot of attachment and love for the country of my origin. It was undoubtedly shocking to hear the depths of hatred that the people gathered at that referendum have for essentially for my home. But I'm not driven to condemn. I'm driven to understand. I'm driven to explain. India has been unjust to many of the people now wanting to secede. I want to examine that and still not take a one-sided view unless that side is the side of facts. I'm going to try to be as truthful and objective as I can in this episode and future ones. These referendums for the creation of Khalistan are organized by a New York-based group called Sikhs For Justice that has held widely attended votes all over the major cities of the UK, the US, and Canada. More than 100,000 Sikhs came to the Civic Center to vote that day. And as I was talking to one of the people standing by the voting booth, a fight broke out amongst a few of them.
90% लोग हिंदू लोग सिखों का कत्लेआम कर रहे थे.
Absolutely wrong. So sorry. It was Congress who killed the people. It was Congress who did the riots.
Let me cut in to explain what's happening here. The man's voice that you hear, he's an elderly man with a scraggly gray beard. His name is Jasbir Singh. He's recounting some really dark history to me. Please be aware that what follows may be hard for sensitive listeners to hear. It's about a massacre that he witnessed of members of his own family, which happened 40 years ago in 1984. He is speaking to me in Hindi. He says it was Hindus who did it. 90% of them were Hindus. It's clear that in his mind, the guilt doesn't just attach to the mob that killed his family in such a gruesome way. The guilt attaches to India, the country that he has left behind that never gave him justice, and to Hindus, the majority religion that he feels oppressed by. Then you hear a woman's voice. She's a bystander. She's wearing an Indian flag on her lapel, and she comes in saying, "Absolutely wrong, absolutely wrong. It was Congress who did it," she says. She wants to lay the blame at the feet of the Congress Party, which was the ruling party in 1984, not on India or on Hindus as a whole. She heard Jasbir Singh telling his story, and she cut him off, but he wasn't having it.
आप अपनी बात रखना. आप कातल लोग हो. आप कातल लोग हो.
भाई साहब, गलत.
इसलिए गलत नहीं है.
भाई साहब.
It got heated very quickly, from 0 to 60 almost instantly. A gathering that had seemed so calm was suddenly boiling with decades old grievances. The faces around me went from being polite to enraged. One man demanded to know if I'd brought the woman with me for some sort of social media stunt. Jasbir Singh and some of the others around her yelled at her, "You're our murderers," calling her, well, not her in particular, but calling Indians and Hindus genociders. And she kept calling them her brothers. Then one man grabbed at the Indian flag that was hanging on her lapel and snatched it away. I walked a short distance away from the scene since I was worried that they were going to take away my phone.
आप हमारी माँ बहनों की इज्जत लूटने वाले, हमारी माओं के साथ गैंगरेप करने वाले, हमारे पग दाढ़ी देख के घर में टायर डाल के जिंदे जलाने वाले, इसलिए आप काता लोग हो। हाँ।
He says, "You are rapists. You raped our mothers and sisters. You murdered our families with burning tires. India's true face is now exposed. India's flag is a genocidal flag."
Listen. Listen. एक मिनट सुनो. Listen. This is our reserved area.
Yes.
You are intimidating us by putting flag on your chest.
So I stepped away, and actually my interview with Jasbir Singh resumed, which you'll hear a little later. This was certainly not what I'd expected that Sunday morning reporting trip to be like. But it shows the intensity of emotion that was present there on that day, even though it's been 40 years since 1984, a very important year in Indian history. These referendums, and there have been more than a dozen all over the cities of the West, have drawn hundreds of thousands of Sikhs, all told. The one in San Francisco alone had an attendance of more than 127,000. People had arrived from all over the Bay Area and from the Central Valley. A lot of Sikhs are farmers in the Central Valley, and a lot of Sikhs are truckers, so they're driven in on trucks and pickups. A lot of turbans, a lot of beards. There were also a lot of women, all ages, little children, older women. Mostly men, though, I have to say, many young men wearing warrior costumes. There was a long line that went back and forth across a rope line to get into the booth for voting, and there was another long line for food. There was music. There were people milling around with drums, shouting slogans, waving the blue and gold Khalistani flag. And there were big banners with the names and faces of Sikh martyrs and people taking selfies near those banners. I actually got to talk to a few of the people who were standing in line to vote.
I think ever since the Modi government have taken over the office, and they've been doing things which are in their favor by and large, not in the other communities.
Yeah.
We are in a smaller number, but that doesn't mean that they're going to force. There's hardly any democracy in India. No signs of democracy is seen. All the minorities, all other religion are being decimated by force. And we've already seen what happened to Muslim community, and then Christians. You might have seen in other part of India how Christians have been treated, and now they are putting their flag on church. This is forcible. This is not democracy. And we have been taught our fundamental rights during our school time. It is one of our fundamental rights that we can worship any religion. I grew up learning this.
What you heard from this man is something you hear from a lot of India's minorities. They feel oppressed by the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi's emphasis on Hindu nationalism. Some people from minority religions fear that their freedoms are being eroded, and Sikhs are less than 2% of India. But for many Sikhs, the desire for Khalistan dates from before 2014 when Modi came into power.
You know, we always been in the 1947 and all. We've always been fighting for rights.
I see.
So I believe this will be like one of the best way to get our freedoms, get all the Sikhs to unite. Just not the Sikhs, all the other races, Americanized people.
The woman who did not want to share her name dated the desire for a Sikh state all the way from 1947. Now, that date is important because that's the year that the modern nations of India and Pakistan were actually created, when the British colonizers left. As Sikh journalist Amarjit Kaur has said, the phenomenon of Khalistan has been there ever since the partition of the subcontinent into India and Pakistan. Many wanted there to be 3 independent states, not 2. Ultimately, Sikh leaders at the time decided to join India instead. But the thing is, while there was a desire for Khalistan, it was not a movement. Not to take these sentiments lightly, but the impetus to break up a country doesn't come from these sort of grand sentiments. It takes rage. It takes long-standing, boiling, curdled rage and a feeling of injustice that just won't quit. That rage exists, as we saw. It isn't about 1947, and it isn't even so much about Modi. That rage hinges on 1984.
We regret to announce the death of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She was critically injured this morning at a residence when she was shot, and she was immediately rushed to All India Medical Institute, where she succumbed to her injuries.
1984 was a very strange, very terrible year in India. Some have called it a mini civil war. It was when Sikh militancy and the Khalistan movement came home to Punjab. I was a child then, watching from afar, but I remember the traumatizing effect of these events. The pivot point was the assassination of the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, on October 31st by her own security guards who were Sikhs. You just heard that assassination announced on All India Radio. That's how India first heard the news. After her death, her son Rajiv Gandhi took over as the Prime Minister. You hear him here calling for calm after her death.
Fellow citizens, it is with a heavy heart that I speak to you this evening. While hundreds of millions of Indians are mourning the tragic loss of their beloved leader, some people are casting a slur on her memory by indulging in acts of hatred and violence.
Her assassination came amidst rising Sikh militancy in Punjab. Some militant Sikh groups demanded Khalistan, others more autonomy for the state of Punjab within the Union of India. There had been many incidents of terrorism, 3 attempted hijackings of planes, bombings of festivals and processions, killings of officials and random citizens. According to the British journalist Mark Tully, at least 410 people had been killed by the early years of the 1980s. Here are the memories of a woman who did not want to be named, who was a teenager living near Punjab at that very fraught time.
The entire 80s was a blur of living in fear and our lives changing, our lifestyles changing completely from earlier. Back in the 70s and 80s, going to the movies was like perhaps the primary source of entertainment. And we stopped. We absolutely just stopped going to movie theaters. We just didn't feel safe. Even in small towns, going to a movie in Delhi was absolutely out of question. We stopped. For a while, we didn't even go to restaurants, but slowly that came back. Having said that, we did not go to crowded markets. And in India, every market is a crowded market. And going to a crowded market was was scary. And if my mom went shopping for household, necessities, I remember feeling scared. And in the absence of internet and cell phones and everything, I would just be like anxiously waiting for her to return.
Yeah. And what was the fear about? Do you remember? Like, was it a bomb blast or
it was a combination. Well, it was mostly bomb blasts, yes. But we were also scared of just, indiscriminate shooting. So I think those were the major ways that the terrorism was being conducted. We were in this, my dad had this meeting in Delhi, and I remember one of his colleagues coming and telling us, did you read the newspaper? Did you see the newspaper? And then there was this Air India flight that had exploded somewhere over the Atlantic, going from Canada to the UK on its way to India. And that was horrifying. And then and of course there are so many other incidents, trains were getting hijacked, buses were getting hijacked, that lent to the general feeling of discomfort and fear and everything.
The government credited one man as being the instigator of the militancy, a very intense, very fundamentalist Sikh cleric with piercing eyes named Bhindranwale. He rarely smiled. He was, let me just say it, he was a good-looking man, tall, lanky, bearded, with a blue turban. He would have fit right in as a protagonist in the sort of movies that Bollywood was churning out in those days that was centered on a sort of angry young man anti-hero. Well, in the early 80s, he had started running a sort of militant fiefdom in Punjab. His band of vigilantes would murder Hindus and Sikhs who fell afoul of Bhindranwale for one reason or another. The militants had converted the Golden Temple, the holiest shrine of the Sikhs worldwide, into a fortress with weapons smuggled in. Interestingly, while there were secessionist Sikh groups at the time, Bhindranwale himself did not demand secession. He was an ideologue, a religious fundamentalist, and a militant, but he was not a Khalistani. In June of 1984, the Prime Minister made the fateful decision to send the army into the Golden Temple to flush them out. They called this Operation Blue Star. The wisdom of this decision, whether to do it at all and when, has been endlessly debated. I don't think we're going to reach a resolution here, and in a future episode, I'll be going over this history in detail. But meanwhile, here's Lieutenant General K.S. Brar, the man put in charge of the operation, explaining to the ANI News interviewer why they chose to attack when they did.
In the 80s, or let's say in 82, 83, 84, things were very bad over there. There was no law and order at all. The police had become a defunct force. There was the saint who had risen from a village, but he had such a charismatic personality that everyone accepted him almost like an 11th guru, chap called Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. And at that stage, slowly and steadily, the state of Punjab started crippling. And Bhindranwale was an all-powerful man. There were murders, there was smuggling taking place, banks being looted. There was no law and order at all. And the state administration and the state police forces were totally dysfunctional.
Right.
A DIG of police, as you know, was killed and just thrown outside the Golden Temple.
Yeah.
A lot of the police were afraid to even take any action against anyone because Bhindranwale had become so powerful. He had become like a Frankenstein. In the beginning of 1984, the feeling was very strong that they're going to declare Khalistan. And the youth, at that time there was a lot of unemployment in Punjab. The youth were without jobs. They had motorcycles and scooters and they roamed around with little pistols and revolvers. and there were many gangsters. So, in other words, law and order had totally broken down. It was so this was at the background of everyone's mind that they are going to declare Khalistan any time. At the same time, thousands of Sikhs will converge to the Golden Temple. So this operation must be finished as fast as possible. Speed was a criteria.
The operation went on for days, not a few hours, as they were expecting. There were more militants inside than they expected who refused to surrender, and they had hidden more weapons inside the temple than anyone knew.
Colonel Fernandez, you have a rare assortment of captured weapons here. Would you like to describe some of this for us?
Yeah, I'd like to tell you we've captured all types of weapons, starting off from automatics, semi-automatics, single shots, weapons, sort of assorted weapons, which were of foreign origin, or weapons which were held by our neighboring countries, and also some of our own weapons which have been probably picked up by some of these boys some time ago. Now, I'd like to tell you that some of the weapons which we recovered are first of all, the AK-47. That has got a Chinese marking here.
The timing was unfortunate. They inadvertently chose a religious holiday when thousands of pilgrims were expected to journey to the Golden Temple. Here's what the legendary Sikh journalist Khushwant Singh said about the attack. Quote, "The army stormed the Golden Temple with tanks, armored cars, and frogmen, with helicopters hovering overhead to give directions. The battle that ensued lasted 2 days and nights. In the crossfire, almost 5,000 men, women, and children perished. The Akal Takht was reduced to rubble by heavy guns fired from tanks." End quote. Sikhs all over the world saw this as a desecration of their shrine, an insult to their faith. Operation Blue Star kicked the Punjab insurgency and the Khalistan movement into high gear. Sikhs never forgave Mrs. Gandhi or any of the generals involved in the operation. General Vaidya, who oversaw the operation, was assassinated in 1996. Lieutenant General Brar, who we just heard in the clip, survived an attempt on his life in 2013. As for Mrs. Gandhi, well, she didn't have to wait that long.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel, and this is a special edition of Nightline. Mrs. Gandhi was apparently shot at her home in New Delhi by 2 members of her own security guard. Reports are that she was shot 8 to 10 times with 4 bullets, striking her in the lower abdomen. The security guards who shot Mrs. Gandhi were reportedly members of India's Sikh minority.
Indira Gandhi was shot by her Sikh security guards on the morning of October 31st as she walked through her garden. The assassination was revenge for Operation Blue Star. At this point, I'm going to be speaking of some incidents that might disturb sensitive listeners. The aftermath of the Gandhi assassination was even more horrifying. Mobs began gathering outside the All India Medical Institute, even while Mrs. Gandhi lay there in a serious condition, with doctors working to save her. The mobs began attacking Sikhs all over Delhi, setting fire to their shops, killing, looting, in a rage of revenge that went on for 3 days.
Good evening. Indira Gandhi, ruler of the world's largest democracy, died today, shot down by 2 of her own bodyguards. They were Sikhs taking revenge for the invasion of their temple in June. And tonight mobs of Hindus have been attacking Sikhs in cities throughout the subcontinent. But already tonight the tensions between the majority Hindus and the Sikh community are spilling over into violence. Buses have been burned and Sikhs attacked, and many have gone into hiding.
Over 3,000 Sikhs were killed in these riots. It has become known as a pogrom, a word that expresses the ethnic nature of the attacks. Witnesses have testified that people in government belonging to the Congress Party orchestrated these killings and the police facilitated them. I was just 14 at the time, watching from afar. My family is not Sikh, so I was not in personal danger. But the stories of people being dragged out of their homes and being burnt alive shocked me to my core. I remember putting my anguish into words in my journal. I had no way of knowing then that 40 years later, I would meet one of the victims whose torment tormented me from 1,000 kilometers away. This was Jasbir Singh, the man you heard at the start of this episode. He was 18 at the time and a witness to the massacre of 27 members of his own family. Here he describes those fateful 3 days in November 1984.
हिंदुस्तान में धर्म के आधार पे कत्लेआम होता है 1984 में
He says, in India, we have had killings based on religion. In 1984, after Indira Gandhi's assassination, on November 1st to the 3rd, there were murders all over India in 18 states and 110 cities. In Delhi, 27 members of my family were burnt alive with burning tires thrown around their necks. My mother, Gurdeep Kaur, was gang raped. Not a single police complaint was filed. I'm an eyewitness of Congress leader Jagdish Tytler's crimes. I saw it with my own eyes. He has never been punished.
मैंने अपने आंखों से देखा, कानों से सुना.
और उसको punishment कभी नहीं हुआ है.
आज तक नहीं.
What kind of a democracy is it? I was 18 years old. I submitted affidavits in every commission that the Indian government set up. The crimes occurred under the noses of the Supreme Court in Delhi. Mobs attacked anyone with the turban and a
देश की
beard.
राजधानी दिल्ली में सबसे बड़ी अदालत सुप्रीम कोर्ट दिल्ली में उनकी नाक के नीचे रात दिन कत्लेआम चला है कि मैं देश की राजधानी दिल्ली में पग दाढ़ी देख के गड़ों में टायर डाल के जिंदे जलाए जा रहे हैं.
The lack of accountability for those who unleashed those attacks on Sikhs makes 1984 a live issue even today, particularly among second-generation expat Sikhs in the West. Just last year, a member of California's Assembly of Sikh origin, Jasmeet Bains, sponsored a resolution to designate the anti-Sikh riots of 1984 as a genocide. It passed with all yes votes. Here she is.
Thank you, Speaker and members. Today I rise to present HAR 2 to bring recognition to a very dark chapter in history. In 1984, over just 3 days, over 30,000 Sikhs in India were persecuted, murdered, raped, and imprisoned without cause. Countless Sikh gurdwaras in Punjab were destroyed or damaged, and people were killed simply for being Sikh. Government officials permitted and even encouraged the murder and bloodshed and issued orders to prevent law enforcement from intervening. For these 3 days, there was mass persecution, murder, rapes of my sisters and brothers, and nobody did anything to stop it.
That lack of accountability is also the wind beneath the sails of Sikhs For Justice. They took inspiration from the 2014 Scottish referendum about leaving the UK and started the Referendum 2020 project under a non-aligned watchdog. Their website, referendum2020.org, highlights information about Operation Blue Star and the 1984 anti-Sikh pogroms. Obviously, there's one large glaring difference between the Scottish referendum and this one. The Scottish one is official, while the Khalistan referendum is non-binding. It's being held outside of India among expats, contrary to India's wishes. Far from being binding in any way, their results will be actively rejected by India. Among Indian Sikhs who are woven into every aspect of society, the support for Khalistan is said to be less than 5%. Of course, it's hard to know for certain because India does not permit activists to freely advocate secession. Soon after the Referendum 2020 project began, India charged several young men for putting up referendum posters. Then they charged the Sikhs For Justice group and the founder, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, for sedition and terrorism. He is now a wanted man in India.
I'm Gaurav Sawant. As always, let's get started with the headlines. On the 1st of July 2020, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu was designated a terrorist individual by Government of India. On the 3rd of February 2021, a non-bailable arrest warrant was issued against Pannu. He is a US-based Sikh separatist and a lawyer by profession, but the National Investigation Agency has him on its radar. They have the right to vote. India's most wanted terrorist and Khalistan backer, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, threatening to target the Indian Parliament on the anniversary of an earlier attack on Parliament on December 13, more than 2 decades ago. This is not the first time that Pannu, a US-based lawyer and Khalistan terror backer, has threatened to target India. He had earlier issued a threat to target Air India aircraft, warning passengers in the US and Canada not to fly Air India after the 19th of November if they valued their lives. But is this free speech, threatening the temple of Indian democracy, or threatening passengers of Air India, alleging their lives would be in danger?
Last year, the Canadian government accused India of having orchestrated the killing of a Khalistan activist in Surrey. A few months after that, US prosecutors charged a man they allege was hired by elements of the Indian government to assassinate Pannu. Pannu has become increasingly extreme in his social media accounts. He uses apocalyptic language against India, its leaders, and visiting diplomats. But being a lawyer, he carefully stays within the bounds of US law by carefully qualifying his words. We will kill Modi politically, he says, for example.
Kill India! Kill India! Politically! Destroy India economically. March 12 to Bombay Stock Exchange. Bombay Stock Exchange.
He says on March 12th, on the very day that the Bombay Stock Exchange was bombed, we will destroy the stock exchange economically.
I met one of the other co-founders of Sikhs For Justice while I was at the referendum. I was able to interview him at San Francisco and then continue our conversation at the Sacramento referendum a couple of months later. This man, whose name is Dr. Bakshish Singh Sandhu, is a medical doctor, soft-spoken and intellectual. He has written a book about the reasons for secession. Dr. Sandhu is the president of the Council of Khalistan, founded by an expat Sikh in the 1980s to declare independence for Khalistan. The founder of the group, Jagjit Singh Chauhan, presented himself as the president of a government in exile and even gave out Khalistan currency. Dr. Sandhu, though, says the goal of the group is to re-establish Punjab's sovereignty. He thinks attempts to win Sikh rights within India have failed due to the duplicity of several successive Indian administrations. I found this conversation very enlightening, and I hope you will too. It helped me understand the strategy of the organizers of the referendum effort. 40 years ago, the Khalistan movement was an upheaval mostly out of rage. This time, the organizers are making a special effort to speak in a language that could win Western support. They consciously cite the UN's Charter on the Self-Determination of Peoples and use the language of civil rights. But there are some contradictions involved, as you'll hear in a bit. I apologize that the sound is a little choppy sometimes. The audio was recorded outdoors and cleaned with AI.
I am Dr. Bakshish Singh Sandhu. I'm President of Council of Khalistan and co-founder of Sikhs For Justice. We want to basically create independent country of Punjab by secession from India. So right now what we are doing is we are basically using the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. These people right to self-determination. So this is the unofficial referendum. Unofficial referendum means only one side is voting the referendum. India is not participating in it. Our ultimate goal is that we will go to the United Nations and ask them to have a UN supervised official referendum, even if be binding. So then whoever wins will control the now.
Okay. And now about the origin of this project, the referendum 2020. Now, I believe before that, there were some cases filed by Sikhs for Justice against some Congress leaders. Was this referendum a result of those cases not succeeding?
That is partly true, because the referendum discussion took place in the United Nations Congress in 1990, when about 35 Congress men, women wrote a letter to the then president that the Sikhs should have the right to self-determination. But there was a time when armed struggle was going on, and a lot of Sikhs were being killed daily. Now, at that time, then again, 1994, there was another basically effort to convince the U.S. Congress to help hold a referendum. So then one time there was a voting in Congress in the late 90s. That voting basically, I think out of the people who voted, 84 congressmen voted for us, and India had a higher number of votes because India is more influential and was at that time. So we have been carrying out the referendum campaign to liberate Punjab from Indian occupation since 1986, when this Council of Khalistan came into being.
Okay.
So there's a movement for the independence of Punjab, and it's not only going on since like 1984, but even before 1947, there was a discussion about Punjab becoming a separate country and not go to the India. As you know, at a partition, the Punjab was divided into two parts. One was East Punjab, and the other was West Punjab. West Punjab went to Pakistan. East Punjab, the Sikhs had to make a decision if they want to go with India or if they go with Pakistan. Somehow the Sikh leadership went or they decided to go with India based on the certain promises that there will be religious freedom and there will be an autonomous state created in the north part of India. But that didn't happen. And not only that didn't happen, India started carving the Punjab starting in 1948. However, the British for 98 years, starting from 1849 to 1997, did not alter the territorial integrity of Punjab. But India started right.
He also spoke to me about 1984 and the lack of accountability for the 3-day-long pogrom on Sikhs.
Justice delayed is justice denied.
Yeah.
And then even Nanavati Commission did not basically did not hold responsible people who had committed the crime.
Now, in the last year, I believe, Mr. Tytler, Jagdish Tytler, has been charged. What is your opinion on that? Is that finally justice being delivered, or do you think it still falls short?
So there's one aspect of the Sikh genocide in Delhi. 30,000 Sikhs were killed with the connivance of Indian government officials, politicians, religious leaders. But he was responsible for killing a large number of people. But all those other thousands upon thousands of people killed, there are other culprits which have also been punished, and some of them have died also. Because Sikhs have been asking for freedom more so since 1984. But when these Sikhs lost for their rights, they enabled terrorists, anti-national, then the Indian government, basically anybody who is distributing literature about Khalistan, they charge them. And the 3 Sikhs have been charged for life. They were sentenced to life imprisonment.
Yeah.
So the justice has been basically like a mirage for the Sikhs. And the Indian system cannot trust the police. Because the police people who basically participate in killing of minorities, they get promotions. And also they get basically, they have impunity.
I asked Dr. Sandhu about some Sikhs for Justice volunteers who had been jailed for arson. I asked him if he supported such violence in pursuit of their goal. You can hear for yourself how he responded.
So, in terms of the people who have been jailed in India for putting up posters and all that, one of the charges is that they committed arson. Do you agree with that? Is that a true charge?
There was okay. That's a good question. There was one case in a liquor store was put on fire, but that was not done by. I think there was an inside job or maybe some manipulation or some kind. But there was nothing to do with us.
So you deny that
we don't promote any violence or arson. We basically, as you know, that this is a great project.
Yeah.
To bring so many people, have food for all those people, and you see all the people here. And this organized matter. There's the Punjab Referendum Commission, who's basically supervising.
Yeah.
So they will authenticate that the people who come to vote, their ID is checked. And they are given a ballot, and they are given a secret, behind the curtain. So it's, we don't believe, I was saying that we don't believe in violence. We don't believe in arson. I even say this, that, many people, many times the violence was staged by Indian government. And then was labeled against Sikhs.
I want to cut in to say that there's no evidence whatsoever that the Indian government staged any attacks of arson or otherwise, though this is a common article of faith among some of the Sikh activists I've spoken to.
But I want to say, why a single Hindu should be killed or hurt just because somebody wants to get more votes? Why is the life of any person less than the other person?
Okay, and so you disavow all violence. You don't think that should be...
we think that violence is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
We disavow all the violence people do to achieve their end.
Yeah.
But how is the Punjab particular problem solved with violence? You have seen, you came to San Francisco.
Yeah.
We're here. There are hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
How the violence is going to support that?
Okay. Now, if you were to hold a referendum in Punjab, that is your goal, to hold an official referendum. Would you permit the Hindus in Punjab also to participate in the referendum?
When the referendum happens in Punjab, all the Punjab's indigenous people, whether Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhas, Dalits, they will be allowed.
Okay.
Otherwise, we don't want to have a country. The Khalistan is the name of independent Punjab, not Sikhstan.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, people who are not steeped in this history may not understand the significance of what Dr. Sandhu just said. He framed their goal as independence for the state of Punjab, for people of all faiths. His goal is to hold an official referendum within Punjab where people of all faiths, not only Sikhs, can vote. But there's a contradiction here. Khalistan has traditionally been framed as an independent nation for Sikhs. A 2012 government form filled out by the Council of Khalistan, the group that Dr. Sandhu now leads, describes their purpose like this: self-determination in the Sikh homeland to secure sovereignty and freedom for the Sikh nation. This non-binding referendum being held all over the West is only open to people of the Sikh faith. I'll be honest, it's not likely that India will ever accept a referendum being held in Punjab, as Dr. Sandhu and other activists want. But if it is, it's not likely to succeed. According to the latest census, Punjab's Sikh population is around 60%, just about under 60%. The desire for Sikhs is said to be a minority opinion among Sikhs in India. And if you throw in other religions, I don't see how it crosses 51%. I asked Dr. Sandhu this very question.
If Sikhs in Punjab, in India, if they reject your call, what would you say to that?
If the referendum happens,
yeah,
and let's say if a fair referendum, if the people of Punjab, they don't want Punjab to be liberated, then I have given them the chance.
But the referendum is in among the expat community.
Now the referendum is outside Punjab, and there will be official referendum one day
in Punjab.
And that in that referendum, if we win, the people of Punjab decide to liberate Punjab, then we win. But let's say the referendum vote happens and we don't get 51%, then somebody else can try other methods, and I will accept the results.
Sikh activists have certainly felt the anxiety of knowing that some of their own were hunted by the Indian government overseas. Regardless, he said, he will never stop fighting for Khalistan.
I am careful, but I am determined to liberate Punjab from Indian occupation as much as in my power. Nothing can stop me. If my life can create Khalistan, if my assassination can create Khalistan, I'm ready to pay the price. Absolutely.
Sikhs For Justice claims to support peaceful, democratic methods of reaching their goal. For example, the tagline for the referendum is ballots, not bullets. Their banners often show the image of a pencil representing votes piercing a gun pointed at them by India. In future episodes, I'll be putting this claim under a magnifying glass for a bit. I'll also be discussing the gangland-style killing of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada, the attempted assassination of Pannu, several other interesting events from history and geopolitics, interviewing experts, activists, and regular people. Follow along, please subscribe, review, and share this podcast.
This has been hosted and produced by me, Anila Mirchandani. If you enjoyed it, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.